Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Meeting House. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody. Glad you tuned in today to our conversation on religion and American life. We're in the middle of the holiday, Holy Day season, with Hanukkah and Christmas sharing the same week. Michael Sebastian is here with me on the piano again.
Hello, Dwight.
Hello, Michael. Welcome back. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you.
He has some wonderful music for us today. Also, my guests include the Reverend Dr. Molly Marshall from her post as president of the United Seminary of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. We're going to discuss the news, interesting stories today from New York, Dallas, Washington, Waco, Texas, and the Vatican City in Rome. I have two books to review today. The first is with the Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois III from his post as senior pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church, Pleasantville, New Jersey. He's written his first book, Silencing White Noise. I've read it and reviewed it, and now we're going to talk to him about it. Then I have a few words to say about snake handling religion in the mountains that run from Alabama through Georgia and Tennessee up into Virginia and Kentucky. That book is Salvation on Sand Mountain, and I look forward to sharing some thoughts about that. So let's get started with the news with my guest, Molly Marshall. Molly, welcome to the Meeting House today.
Thanks so much, Dwight. Good to see you.
You've got a lot of snow up there in your way, right?
Snow on snow, as
Snow
the
on
old
snow.
carol puts it.
They keep warning all of us around the country of this great storm that's coming through, and yet it keeps coming and dumping snow up there, right?
They do. It's not gone away yet.
It's not gone. Well, let's start the news today in Dallas, Texas. A Christmas pageant extravaganza in a Texas town, where else, has drawn both praise and criticism. The place is Prestonwood Baptist Church, and the annual event involves nearly 1,000 people in the cast and choir, plus a live orchestra, zoo animals, and yes, flying angels. It's called The Gift of Christmas and includes even a flying Santa and sleigh. More than 70,000 people are expected to pay the $22.50 admission price to see the annual three-act play this year. Molly, have you ever been to one of these big extravaganzas?
No, and I can probably die happy without ever going. You know, the joke about North Dallas is you don't pray to go to heaven, you're already there.
You're already there. That's right.
In that part of the world. Yeah.
The Prestonwood Baptist Church, of course, a church that I'm familiar, many people are familiar with, has its share of celebrity members, and they do everything in a big way, I think. But you know, Molly, isn't it true that even as far back as the Middle Ages, the use of plays and pageants to educate people who were largely illiterate, this is the way people learned the nativity story?
Yes, and they were held in the great medieval cathedrals, and music and the theatrics of it were scaled so
Yes.
as to fill that and be instructive. The mishmash of this, Santa and the sleigh, amidst the story of the Nativity, is a little bit troubling, of course, and the commodification of the Christmas story immersed in the larger commercialism.
Yes, I'll have to admit, when I saw the pictures of it and it included Santa and his sleigh high up in the sky, I thought, yeah, this mashup is not so good.
Right.
But otherwise, you know, it continues a long tradition of turning the biblical story, the narrative, using stained glass and plays and theater like this to teach the story.
I'd have a little less problem with it if they would rehabilitate the original St. Nicholas, who actually is a considered part of Christian history and a saint who did well. And so to rehabilitate that rather than simply Santa would go down a little easier.
That's a great idea. I wonder if they've ever thought about doing that. Having
They
the
have yet, they've yet to call me
They
for
haven't called you.
consultation.
I'm going to suggest that they call you. So
Right.
you could be listed as a consultant as
Oh,
on
I'd
there.
love it. I'd love it.
Well, let's go a little further south in Texas to Waco, Texas. A research team at the Baptist-affiliated Baylor University published findings this week that show higher levels of religious faith and practice among athletes than among the general student population. This was according to a study published last month in the Journal of College and Character. Quote, our findings suggest that Baylor is succeeding, they write, in competing at the highest levels of sport and remaining faithful to its Christian mission, end quote, said Daniel Allen. Allen was a doctoral student in sociology at the school when the study was conducted in 2020. He is now an assistant professor at Olivet Nazarene University in Illinois. Molly, did this surprise you?
Yes and no. Of course, it seems that he found what he wanted to find in the research, and probably Baylor University was only too happy to receive that word. I understand these kinds of marketing and branding realities in a school of higher education. You could make the argument that nothing like a stand at the goal line to bring about a flurry of prayer, or the actual name of the great pass being the Hail Mary.
The Hail Mary, that's right. That's a great.
Well, but the Southern culture and sports and religion is all kind of interwoven, and so depending upon his sample, I can imagine that he had some data for this. Uh, but it was a little bit surprising.
They confess in their publications about it that they were surprised. They had hypothesized just the opposite, that student athletes would have a lower, rate of religious practice and religious devotion, and that they were surprised by this. So, I don't know. I guess it's good we have religiously oriented athletes, at least down in Baylor, Texas, who's surprised at this, as you say.
Well, and the other factor is that football is a religion for many people, and their need for community, spirituality, esprit de corps, something larger than they, is all wrapped up in being a fan.
Well, you lived in Kentucky long enough to know that there's a different sport that's the religion in Kentucky. And
Right.
I pastor a little church in Hendersonville, North Carolina. It's the same in North Carolina. North Carolina can't get any of their football teams to really excel, but they've got a lot of great basketballs. So,
Understand?
all right, let's go to New York City for our next news story. The state of New York led the country in 2021 in the number of anti-Semitic incidents reported to public officials. That's according to the annual report of the Anti-Defamation League. Other states high on that list are New Jersey, California, Florida, Texas, and Michigan. For instance, anti-Semitic writing and symbols were painted at a children's playground and a gated community during incidents of vandalism and burglary in Weston, Florida. President Biden has created an interagency working group to address growing anti-Jewish acts and words. Do you see any of this up there where you are, Molly?
Yes. Jewish community is not large, but there is anti-Semitic activity going on. And at a school where we prize interreligious engagement, we are paying attention to what rabbis are saying in our community, and want very much to be supportive and engaged with them. It's not surprising that this comes out of New York, given the population there. The frightening thing is that it is on the rise.
Yes, it is.
Vandalism and the rhetoric, and it's a very it's a terrifying thing that this at this time, much like white nationalism,
Hmm.
and probably it's tied up with that,
They're tied
is
up together.
it's all tied up. I'm sure Willie will have more to say about that after a
Well,
bit.
you
Yes.
know, this a lot of this, I think, is the Trump effect on things. Is that his own careless use of public rhetoric, the way he demeaned a lot of people. It gave permission to everybody else to just say whatever they were thinking, and including all of their prejudices. Uh, it's not
Yeah.
just anti-Semitic; it's anti-everything.
Yes, but it does play into the long trope of
It
scapegoating
does.
for anything that seems to destabilize a culture where they are the minority. And so it's a long history.
Ha- have you ever been part of an interreligious dialogue, or
Oh yeah.
in your long career as a professor and president?
Yes, both Christians and Jews and Christians and Muslims. I've been a part of both.
Wow. Well, let's go to Rome now for our next story. The Virgin Mary travels with the people as they migrate north into the United States, said Pope Francis in remarks celebrating the feast of the Lady of Guadalupe. She, quote, she came to accompany the American people on this hard road of poverty, exploitation, socioeconomic, and cultural colonialism. The occasion recalls the day in 1531 when a peasant boy named Juan Diego reported seeing Mary at the small town in Mexico. The Pope spoke from St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, quote, she is in the midst of the caravans that walk northward in search of freedom and well-being, end quote. Washington is trying to decide what to do about all this at the southern border. Molly, what do you think about what's going on down there? And have you thought about the Mary traveling with all of these people trying to look for their own promised land?
Well, let me start with
Okay,
Our Lady
okay,
Guadalupe, the patron saint, of course, of Central and South America, beloved person who symbolizes liberation and nearness. And of course, in Catholic tradition, it's often Mary who draws near as the mothering figure to suffering people, and they believe has access to the Son in particularly intimate ways.
right.
Uh, I love France's statement that the people are accompanied and that they are not away from the care of God in their journey. I think a theology of migration needs to be done these days. What are people anticipating, and how do they reframe their longing as they are on the move? And we're seeing it all over the world. People displaced, on the move, looking for a different home, looking for security. I probably am a bleeding heart, a liberal here, but I think that if every church would say, if the government would make it legal and every church would say, we'll take one family, we could absorb into our communities people who are desperately longing for a different kind of life.
Well,
I'd love to see that happen.
I couldn't agree with you more. Your suggestion for a theology of migration, I think, is so timely. It certainly has deep biblical roots, wouldn't it, Amali?
Sure, surely.
We think about the whole Exodus story, and then, of course, the pieces of the Jesus story that involve fleeing for safety and the Jewish people migrating. I'm like you. Do you remember a couple of years ago when the Syrian refugees were flooding Europe? Pope
Yes.
Francis did exactly what you just said. He called upon every family and every parish I think there were 120,000 parishes, Catholic parishes in Europe, and he called upon every one of them to take in a family. I
That's
thought,
right.
that's the kind of gospel, that's the kind of Christian ministry I think we ought to be doing.
Exactly. And these persons would renew their communities, and people would decenter themselves and extend great welcome to the stranger. That is the heart of the gospel, as far as I'm concerned.
How different is the papal rhetoric? They're looking for freedom, they're being accompanied by the Virgin Mary. How different is that rhetoric than our own political rhetoric,
Yeah,
trying to demonize these people?
that's right.
My
Uh,
philosophy is, if it were me, I'd let them all in, give them all a green card, teach them English, and put them to work.
well, exactly, because there are labor shortages, and I don't want to demean them by making them do the scut work that U.S. workers are not willing to do, but that work needs doing, and in that they can prepare to do other things.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It's a gateway kind of profession. In the meat packing plants of Iowa, they are flooded with refugees, and we need to find ways to support that.
Well, Joe Biden needs to listen to his own Pope Francis, don't you think?
I think so. I think so.
My last
Yeah.
story today is also about Joe Biden from Washington, D.C. President Biden held a White House ceremony this week to sign the gay marriage bill that carries the title Respect for Marriage Act. It requires states to recognize marriages, including gay marriages legally performed in any other state. It also includes provisions to protect organizations and institutions from doing things that violate their religious convictions. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, herself a practicing Catholic, said at the occasion, "At last we have history in the making, but not only are we on the right side of history, we're on the right side of the future, expanding freedom in America." It's good news for all of us, isn't it, Molly?
Well, I believe that it is. I think it's a long time coming, and I'm hoping that a whole lot of pastors this Sunday are going to say this is a blessed moment to recognize all created in the image of God, granted equal dignity. I
It's,
celebrate it.
you know, it's been a struggle for the American population and the Christian population to come to terms with the LGBTQ community and to wrestle with our own tradition, to wrestle with the scriptures, to wrestle with our theology. But you know, it's just been, what was it, 1997 that our Congress passed the act not recognizing gay marriage. There's been a sea change in the way ordinary Americans think about it, including churches, including my own church.
Yes. It's because we've gotten to know our neighbors.
I agree 100%.
We've gotten to know our children, our grandchildren, our cousins. As the culture has opened, conversations have been broached that people were unwilling to broach. And in some quarters, we've learned how to deal more respectfully with others.
Have you ever taught a course in which this has been dealt with?
Yes, in a section of theological anthropology, in systematic theology,
Hmm.
you have to deal
You have to deal
with
with it.
human sexuality. I'm light years from where I was when I started as a young professor in 1984, about 40 years.
Yeah.
Quite a shift in my own thinking.
Hmm.
I read scripture differently.
Hmm.
I understand person's experience in a different way. And so there were years students would come and disclose aspects of their identity to me because I was a safe
Hmm.
place. And I treasured
Hmm.
that disclosure as students would talk about their lives. And I'm so grateful that that many churches, which for too long had been sources of wounding, are now places of welcome.
You know, I second your testimony there about the changes in my own life, my own theology, my own practice on both of these issues. You know, for many years I was a pastor in Pittsburgh where everybody in our church was a transplanted person. They weren't
Yeah.
strictly refugees, but they were away from home. And uh, this caused me to read the Bible different and to understand the gospel different. And then on this issue of sexual orientation, being with people, our fears dissolve, our stereotypes are blown up, and we read the Bible different. We think different about Jesus. We think different about ourselves, don't we?
Indeed.
We're still on that journey. Molly, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us from snow-covered St. Paul, Minnesota.
That's right.
God bless you.
And bless you, Dwight, and
Thanks.
you as well, Willie. Forgive me for scooting now. Take good care.
All right. Bye.
Advent joy.
Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's a great song. It's one of everybody's favorites from one of the most popular movies, Broadway plays ever made. But what is special? Why did you play it today?
Well, I chose that song because I love it.
Yeah.
And I love Judy Garland.
Don't we all?
And for members of the LGBTQ community of my generation, that song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, was sort of an anthem.
Yes, I remember this. How did that happen and why did it happen?
I think it happened for two reasons. One is the song itself and the lyrics to the song, that there is a place that is better than here. And, you know, someday I'll get there. Someday we will all get there to a place that's better than here.
It's almost like a promised land.
Yes, exactly. And I think the second reason, especially for us old folks, Judy Garland was beloved by the gay community.
By the gay community. I am aware of that too. they picked up her theme song and made it the anthem.
They
Didn't they?
did.
Thanks for playing it today.
My pleasure.
Great. You're in the meeting house with me, your host, Dwight A. Moody. And my sidekick, Michael Sebastian, at the piano. He's going to play some more in just a minute. But I want to welcome to the meeting house the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois III. Willie, it's great to see you today.
Dr. Moody, it's so great to see you and to be a beneficiary of so much of your great work in the world.
You are in New Jersey. Do you have any snow up there in New Jersey?
No, we did Monday in the northern part of our state, but it's been pretty rainy otherwise.
That's right. Let's talk just a minute about our relationship. I first met you in Louisville, Kentucky, I believe in January 2010. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was a first year seminarian at Harvard Divinity School.
And you were part of the great Morehouse gang that came to preach at that very first inaugural National Festival of Young Preachers. I remember.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Those were formative times, and also opportunity to build some lasting friendships that are still sustaining me today.
Yes, one of the great pleasures I have, Willie, is to open up my Facebook feed every single day and read your posts. I read about J.C. Campbell and Winterbourne Jones and so many of these young people scattered all over the country. I see their friendships. I see their good work. I see their publications, their marriages, births, graduations. It's just a wonderful, wonderful treat for an old man like me. I'm glad you've been a part of it. And now you're up there pastoring a Baptist church in Pleasantville, New Jersey.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mount Zion Baptist Church in Pleasantville, New Jersey, and also assistant professor of liberation theology at New York Theological Seminary.
So I want to, before we start on the book, let's talk about this position. I read about this. Tell me what you teach and who your students are.
Sure. So I teach classes like Black Lives Matter, theology on lockdown, which is a theological interpretation of American carcerality, religious ethics and contemporary social issues. And I also teach in our doctoral program. But my primary teaching post here is actually in New York State prisons. I direct a master's degree program at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, that's a male facility, and Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Over the last 40 years, NYTS has graduated 526 men at Sing Sing Theological Seminary with a master's degree in theology. And just this semester, I was able to launch the program at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. So now we have 9 sisters who are engaging in graduate theological education.
Willie, this is a whole program in and of itself.
This is true.
You know, I have a son who spent more than a decade in prison. And so I've had a lot of experience going in and out of prisons and being in contact with incarcerated people and, you know, hearing that side of the story. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this story. Yesterday on Facebook, my college roommate posted a picture of a nativity set, and behind it was a piece of artwork that he had bought from my son, who had drawn this piece of artwork while he was in federal prison, and he was taking a class by extension from a college, and they had read the Gospels, and the professor asked him to draw something for his final exam, draw something to illustrate what he had read. And so he drew a picture of Christ on the cross. It was called a contour piece, which means once he put his pen to the paper, he didn't pick it up until he'd finished. But the very last thing he did was he wrote the words Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then signed his name. I think about this when I hear you talk about your ministry, your teaching ministry to people who are incarcerated. what a powerful calling that is. And this is in Sing Sing. Where is Sing Sing prison?
Sing Sing is about 60 miles north of New York City in Ossining, New York. And Bedford Hills is roughly the same distance in Bedford Hills, New York.
Up the Hudson Valley.
Up the Hudson Valley, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm gonna play a video a little bit later connected with another story that a children's choir from Hudson Falls, New York is singing, which is straight up the valley as well. So you teach these students, I'm very interested in this. You teach these students, many of them would not have even a high school diploma. Am I not right about this, let alone a college?
You're right. The majority of our students have earned a GED, a bachelor's degree, and now a master's degree while incarcerated. While incarcerated.
Well, I know my son earned his GED while incarcerated, so I'm very familiar with that. So they do this while incarcerated, and then they come into your program to earn a master's degree in theology.
Mm-hmm.
What do they anticipate doing with this?
So our program is really pillared on theological imagination, justice, liberation, and leadership. And so the vast majority of our graduates who do come home, they serve as they work as chaplains. Some of them have built extraordinary nonprofit organizations who interrupt mass incarceration. One of them, the Exodus Transitional Community in East Harlem, which has been recognized by U.S. presidents. Some of them have gone on to get PhDs in theology, sociology. I can't count the number of social workers who have come out of our program. So most of them, they come home and they engage in anti-incarceration work. I see what I do now as an opportunity to help shape and build and empower the real front line of ending mass incarceration, impacted persons, formerly incarcerated women and men.
Well, you heard my conversation with Molly just a few minutes ago about the important role of ministry, theology of refugees, which I think is very important. Probably in our country, your work, the working with incarcerated people, empowering them, doing justice work on both sides of the bars, is as important in our country as refugee work is globally. This is what I think. Are you writing a book about this, Willie?
My next book will center and harvest a lot of my experiences over the last 2 years.
I hope you're writing, because I've read your book, Silencing White Noise.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you.
I published my review a couple of weeks ago, 6 Practices to Overcome Our Inaction on Race. And in my review, I said this. I said, I don't know a lot about your work, but I could tell by reading this book that you knew a lot about me. I am the very kind of person, white person, that you're writing about in this book.
Wow.
And but I want to ask you the very first question. I want you to define and describe for us what you mean by white noise.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, the book is really centered around characterizing and articulating whiteness as white noise. I wanted a metaphor for thinking about white supremacy that couldn't be limited to individual actions, nor could it be limited to institutional actions, but really seeing how those work together in the public square and in private life, because the public does impact the private in so many ways, but also thinking about racism as a discursive practice, as something that is at work beneath the consciousness of all of us. That we are all unaware of how we're being shaped by the idea of whiteness. I say very clearly that whiteness is not about skin color, nor is it about ancestry. It's not an identity that I'm talking about. I'm talking about it as an ideology, as this grammar and language of America that negates the idea of non-white love, non-white power, non-white equality, non-white creativity, non-white joy in a lot of ways. So I use this metaphor of white noise to talk about how racism lulls us to sleep against racism, how it tells us very pessimistic things about how we can fix it, but also tells us some very tragic things about each other. So white noise is the practices, inaction, and also the misrepresentations that protect and perpetuate white supremacy.
Well, many of us who are white, and in my case old, have become very sensitized to this, as much as we are capable of. I know that there are defense mechanisms in me that push back against some of this, push back against it in ways that I'm not even aware of, and sometimes I am aware of it. I can't help it. It is so ingrained in me, as much as I detest it.
Yeah.
And then you give, I want you to also talk about this phrase, reparative intercession. That's such a creative phrase. As a matter of fact, all the phrases that you used in this second part of the book, or all these 6 chapters, were so creative. But let's start with that word, reparative intercession. What do you mean by this? Give us a definition.
No, thank you. I draw this idea from the Christian practice of intercessory prayer.
Yes.
This idea that we use our prayer our prayer power, our intimacy with the divine on behalf of another. And I thought that intercession has to be more than prayer. That there needs to be a politics of intercession, an intercessory politics of sorts, right?
That is such a great phrase, the politics of intercession. Have you preached on that? Do you have a sermon on this subject, the politics of intercession?
I'm sure I have preached about it over the years in one way or another.
That's a great title, Willie. That's a great title for a book, for a sermon, an article, the politics of intercession.
Yes, sir. And so this, what it means to be a reparative intercessor is to, in terms that I like to use when I'm talking about it, is showing up, acting up, and speaking up on behalf of those who are less privileged and less powerful than one is, right? This is how we use our power and privilege as a way of creating space for and releasing the voices of those who have been silenced and those who are unprotected. And so when we practice reparative intercession, we are standing in the tragic gap, that place between the way things are and the way we know things can be. It's a capacity to speak truth to power, but it's also doing something reparative every day.
I remember reading those phrases in your book. Help me say them again. Showing up, speaking up, and what was the third one?
And acting up.
And acting up, yes. Showing up, speaking up, and acting up. I think perhaps summarizes all 6 of these things in such a powerful way. We just need to show up, speak up, and act up.
Yeah.
I like that. Not just on race issues, but on lots of issues.
Sure,
Isn't that true?
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's impossible to segregate any one issue. They all work together. We live under a matrix of domination and oppression. Sexism is working with racism, and racism is working with classism, and homophobia is working with other forms of structural domination and interpersonal bias.
In all of these things, in working with refugees, in working with the incarcerated, in working with minority groups, marginalized groups, a strategy of showing up, speaking up, and acting up ought to be right at the core of our ministerial practice, shouldn't it?
That's how I follow Jesus. I follow Jesus under the conviction that we are supposed to spend our lives doing life with those who are most vulnerable. I think that's what the symbol of the incarnation means. It is a self-emptying. It's a kind of self-kenosis of all of our power and privilege on behalf of those who have been stricken to the lowest caste systems of our societies.
I'm going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to talk about these 6 practices that you talk about. Here's Michael Sebastian again with the song made famous by Billie Holiday, God Bless the Child. That's Michael Sebastian on the piano playing God Bless the Child. Thank you, Michael. Made famous by the late Billie Holiday. I'm Dwight A. Moody, your host in the Meeting House, talking with the Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois III about his book, Silencing White Noise. He's advocating 6 practices to topple white supremacy. Willie, let's go through these 6 practices.
Yes, sir.
Embracing the difference as gift, what you call clues to color. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So one, I know they're called practices, but they're really robust processes. I really talk about them as rhythms, understanding that rhythm is the basic unit of music, and those moans and groans at the bellies of ships that helps to sustain my ancestors during the Great Maafa, during the Great Transatlantic Slave Trade. That's why I call them rhythms, because there's something artistic about it, and there's something, and I hope something soul nourishing about what it means to do this hard work of reparative intercession. But cues to colors. So often I hear people say, "Well, I don't see color." And the reality is, to say we don't see color is to deny part of one's experiences. That to say that I see color is not to say that we cannot have human oneness, but it acknowledges that there's no human sameness when it comes to treatment and opportunity and access in this country. And so to not see me as a Black man is to not see a big part of what does not allow me to get certain jobs, what allows me to be followed as an act of patriotism on the streets of our urban centers by police officers. Skin color matters. And when we become not colorblind, but when we become color conscious, that's when we can actually grieve what whiteness has done to us.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. I appreciate you making this distinction between rhythms and practices. I appreciate you coming on that. So when we talk about color, I want to ask you about something. I have tried over the last 20 years to take color out of my vocabulary when I'm describing somebody. You know, you can be in a conversation with people and they'll start talking about somebody and they'll say, well, he was a Black man. And I always stop and ask, why should we colorize them? Should we colorize everybody, or should we colorize nobody? And I've tried to take that adjective out of my vocabulary. Is that a good thing?
Well, I think that obviously there's something noble about what you're attempting to do.
Thank you. I want to know whether it's a good thing.
Yeah. There's something noble about what you are trying to do. But I think there is power in being able to name someone's race, because it allows us to celebrate the dignity of difference. In fact, what I call in the book, the divinity of difference.
Yes,
right? There's something divine about this flesh. There's something divine about your flesh. And what happens when we are not able to name the beauty and the shades of the diversity of God's image, it allows what we allow to be normalized, which is generally whiteness, to still hold its supremacy in society. So to be able to name color and to name the beauty of all colors is work that ultimately gets us to doing more reparative work that doesn't allow us to skip over the harms that have been done by color.
I understand the power. So I want to ask you, when I introduce or when I refer to Michael Sebastian, my associate here at the piano, should I refer to him as a white man?
Well, he is a white man.
I know. So by recognizing color, should we do it with everybody?
Well, I think there is I say yes, but I think there is a particular, because there's something that comes along with, there's meaning that comes along with white skin as well.
No, I agree with this.
To call someone white, to say that's a white man, is also to name the privilege. The same way that to call someone a Black man is to name this history of oppression. So when we're able to talk about this history of what these colors mean, we have to confront them. We need to be confronted by them until we get to the point that we're able to love and appreciate all of them.
Okay, number 2 is what you call momentum to encounter. That is confronting the histories of whiteness, which is what you're talking about right here. Mm-hmm. Confronting the history of whiteness.
There's a type of tragic amnesia that often exists in America. But more than that, there's an innocence, a national innocence that we want to hold on to, as if this racial nightmare that we are living in is no, none of us have created it, but many of us, most of us even, are perpetuating it, right? I think it's important to be compelled and moved forward by the momentum of history, because it allows us to say that what we are experiencing is not normal. It's not a given. It's not natural, but it comes out of particular social processes and social evolution, right? To be able to name that mass incarceration, the over warehousing of Black and brown bodies, it's not natural. It's not normal. It didn't just emerge because Black and brown folk have a more inclination towards criminality. But no, it reminds us that what we know today about prisons can be traced back, what I call legacy located. It can be legacy located back to chattel slavery, where during that time, Black bodies were perceived as non-human and poor white bodies were seen as disposable. And what communities make up our prisons? Black and brown people and poor white people.
Yeah.
And to trace that history, to name that history, says, no, poor white folk and Black and brown folk are not more criminalized, but there are systems that have shaped and formed over time what we're experiencing now in our carceral system. It's what I call telling a history of the present, right? Every present moment has a history that got us to this point. And when we understand that history, we're able to say, no, this is a social development and possibly imposition and not something that is natural.
Number 3, you call pattern recognition.
Yeah.
And you describe that as honoring our interdependence.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
You know, Dr. King, who has had an outsized influence on how I think about what it means to be a public follower of Jesus, he talks about us being a part of a single garment of destiny, being stitched together in that way. And that kind of neighborliness is so important, to be able to see ourselves in each other's moral line of sight, to be able to say that we are each other's moral responsibility is so important. And it is also important for folk like me to be able to say that white people in this country have experienced 400 years of oppression as well. To be able to name the fact that racial capitalism is what allowed Europe to colonize itself before it ever colonized Africa and created this experiment of capitalism and imperialism that is now America. Is that so many of us, if the pandemic has taught us nothing, is that what I saw in food lines in Atlantic County were long lines of white folk who didn't have extra money to pay for food when they lost jobs, right? What we know is that there is a system of extraction and exploitation, like racial capitalism, that causes Black and white folk who are economically situated in so many ways to compete against each other without realizing that there's a system that is exploiting all of us.
Yes, there are many people who think that globally, the dominant issue is the rich over the poor, which sometimes is enmeshed with racial issues, but sometimes it stands alone and perhaps is certainly a great global challenge to us. I've got time for one more. Number 5, I want to ask you about this. You call it the pulse to risk, by which you mean sacrificing our power and privilege. I was very moved by this chapter as I read there, as a white person who's had a great deal of not necessarily power, but certainly privilege most of my life. I want you to talk about this, what you call the pulse to risk.
we have to be willing to accept the risk and the vulnerability of what it means to name, identify, and then either leverage that on behalf of people who don't have that power and privilege, or to, at every cost, deny ourselves of that power and privilege. It's hard work for me not to lean into my male privilege. Right? It's hard work not to honor the fact that as a cisgender heterosexual man, that there are certain privileges and power that I benefit from. And so I have to see my interrogation of that, my contestation of that, as an act of holiness. That me being able to use my power and privilege on behalf of someone else is me sacrificing at the altar of us, and not just allowing me to live on my own throne, enthronement of power and privilege. Because when I am empowered, when I live this life with class privilege and sexuality privilege and gender privilege, there's somebody who is living on the underside of my privilege. And to be able to do that, I have to be able to perceive that as a spiritual discipline, as something that is getting me closer to what it means to reveal the image of God and the reign of God here on the earth.
There's so much more here we can talk about. I like your reference to this as an act of holiness, and we need to talk about this some more. I'm going to schedule you again for a visit to the Meeting House. We need to talk more about so much, including the incarceration stuff. I've had a long personal history with that, and this discipline of holiness, the racial work. God bless you, Willie. It's so great to see you and to hear you and to learn from you. And I want us to do this again real soon.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you to the Reverend Dr. Willie Dwayne Francois III, Pleasantville, New Jersey. I'm going to be back in just a minute, but it's Christmas season, and here is Michael playing some Christmas music for us. Great, Michael. You know what I have here, Michael?
A cape?
What does this look like to you?
A cape.
It looks like a cape, but it's not. This is my elf costume because, as you know, you and I are hosting a party this week. We call it the 17th Annual Sebastian Sock It To Me Sing-Along for our church up in North Carolina. And I picked this up yesterday at a theater costume place. I'm going to wear it. I understand you have a elf costume to wear tomorrow.
It'll be a surprise.
It's going to be a surprise. You've got the shoes and the hat and everything, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Well, we're out of time today. I'm going to have to save my book review on snake handling for next week. It'll be just fine for next week. I want to thank all of you for joining us today in the Meeting House. It's been a pleasure hosting you for our conversation on religion and American life. I am your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody in the Meeting House. My sidekick here today at the keyboard, Michael Sebastian. It's been a great day. You can visit our website at TheMeetingHouse.net, where you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter. You can go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to this video distribution. But I hope you have a very blessed and safe holiday season. Thanks to all the crew here at WGGS TV 16 in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm Dwight A. Moody in the Meeting House. I'll see you next week.